Normandy, France, June 24th, 1944, 4:37 a.m. A 19-year-old British Army private named Thomas Ellery knelt in the mud behind a collapsed barn, scrubbing rust from a shovel blade with a wire brush, when the ground beneath his knees gave way. Not collapsed, shifted. The earth moved in a way soil should not move, a hollow sound echoing beneath the surface. In that moment, with his hand still gripping a tool no one thought mattered, Thomas Ellery discovered something the Germans had spent 8 months building and the Allies had no idea existed. What began as punishment duty became the exposure of a supply network that would change the calculus of the Normandy breakout and cost the Wehrmacht a lifeline they could not afford to lose. Thomas Ellery was not supposed to be in Normandy. He was supposed to be in a logistics depot in southern England, processing supply requisitions and inventory sheets. Far from the fighting. He had enlisted in 1942 at 17. Lie about his age because his older brother had been killed at Tobruk, and Thomas felt the weight of that absence like a stone in his chest. His parents had one son left, and Thomas had decided that son would finish what his brother started. But the army had other plans. Thomas was small, wiry, with poor eyesight and a tendency toward respiratory infections. He failed infantry training twice. He was reassigned to the Royal Army Service Corps, the logistics branch, the men who moved supplies and maintained equipment, and were essential but never celebrated. Thomas hated it, not because the work was unimportant, but because it felt distant from the war his brother had died fighting. He wanted to matter. He wanted his service to mean something beyond counting crates and oiling truck axles. He shipped to Normandy 3 weeks after D-Day. Part of the logistics company tasked with supporting the 50th Northumbrian Division as they pushed inland from Gold Beach. The fighting was brutal. Hedgerow country, the bocage, where every field was a fortress and every lane a killing ground. Progress was measured in meters, not miles. Casualties were constant. And behind the infantry, the logistics corps worked in a different kind of hell, moving ammunition and food and medical supplies through roads that did not exist, on artillery fire that did not discriminate between combat troops and supply drivers. Thomas drove trucks, unloaded crates, dug latrines, and tried not to think about how far he was on the front line he had wanted to reach. Then he made a mistake. June 22nd, 1944. His unit was bivouacked near the village of Christot, a shattered collection of stone buildings and rubble 5 kilometers south of Bayeux. Thomas was assigned to supply detail, moving jerrycans of fuel from a depot to forward positions. The work was repetitive, exhausting, dangerous. German artillery had the range. Shells came in randomly, without warning. You worked and you hoped. On his 6th trip, Thomas saw a group of infantry soldiers taking cover in a ditch, smoking cigarettes, resting between patrols. He stopped the truck, walked over, asked if they needed anything. One of them, a corporal, asked for cigarettes. Thomas had none, but he remembered seeing a crate marked as medical supplies that felt too light, that rattled in a way bandages did not rattle. He went back to the depot, opened the crate, found cartons of cigarettes packed for officers. He took 2 cartons, brought them to the infantry. They thanked him. He felt, for a moment, useful. 2 hours later, a lieutenant from the medical corps found the open crate and reported the theft. Thomas was identified, questioned, and charged with misappropriation of military supplies. The punishment was not severe by wartime standards. No court-martial, no prison, but he was removed from driving duty and reassigned to equipment maintenance. For the next week, he would clean tools, repair hand implements, and perform whatever menial labor his sergeants invented. It was humiliation designed to remind him that the Army functioned on discipline, not initiative. Thomas accepted it without protest. He had been stupid. He had acted on impulse. And now he would scrub rust off shovels while other men fought. The morning of June 24th, Thomas reported to Sergeant William Hackett, a 42-year-old career soldier who managed equipment for the logistics company. Hackett was not cruel, but he was thorough. He showed Thomas the pile of tools recovered from various positions, shovels, pickaxes, wire cutters, mallets, all caked in mud, rust, blood. Your job, Hackett said, is to make these usable again. Clean them, oil them, sharpen the blades, inspect for damage. Anything broken gets marked for disposal. Anything salvageable goes back into circulation. Work until it is done. Do not waste time. Do not disappear. Understood? Thomas nodded. Hackett handed him a wire brush, a can of oil, a whetstone, and walked away. Thomas carried the tools to a collapsed barn at the edge of the bivouac area, a structure that had taken a direct hit from something large, probably a bomb, leaving only 2 walls and part of a stone foundation. It offered no real shelter, but it was away from the main camp, away from the stares of men who knew he had been punished. He set the tools on the ground, organized them by type, and began working. The sun was not yet up. The air was cold, damp, carrying the smell of smoke and earth, and something chemical he could not identify. Around him, the camp stirred slowly. Soldiers moving to latrines, cooks starting fires, the low rumble of distant artillery. Thomas focused on the work. Scrub the rust. Oil the metal. Sharpen the edges. Repeat. He worked for 3 hours without stopping. By 7:30 a.m., he had cleaned 18 shovels, 6 pickaxes, and a dozen smaller tools. His hands were raw. His back ached from crouching. But the work was meditative in a way he had not expected. There was a rhythm to it, a simplicity. No decisions. No risk. Just repetition. He reached for the next shovel, a standard infantry entrenching tool with a wooden handle and a steel blade bent slightly from impact. He knelt near the remains of the barn's foundation, positioned the blade across his knee, and began scrubbing. That was when the ground shifted. A hollow thud beneath his knees, like kneeling on a wooden floor instead of earth. Thomas stopped. He pressed his hand against the ground. The mud was thick, but beneath it, something hard. He cleared the surface layer of soil, expecting stone or debris. Instead, he found wood, a plank, rough cut, about 30 centimeters wide, partially buried but clearly placed, not natural. He cleared more soil, following the plank. It extended a meter, then another, disappearing under the barn's collapsed foundation. Thomas sat back, confused. Why would there be a wooden plank buried here? He looked around. No one was watching. The camp was occupied with morning routines. He found a shovel, a clean one, and began digging carefully around the plank. The soil was loose, easier to move than it should have been. Within minutes, he had exposed a section of wooden framework, planks laid parallel, forming a structure, a cover. He pried at the edge, found a gap, and pulled. The section lifted, hinged, revealing darkness below. A hole. No, not a hole. A shaft, square cut, reinforced with timber supports, descending into the earth. Thomas's heart began to pound. This was not random. This was construction. Deliberate. Hidden. He lowered himself into the opening. Feet first, finding a ladder rungs nailed to the shaft wall. He climbed down 3 meters and reached the bottom. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, filtering from above. He was standing in a tunnel. Not a trench. A tunnel, carved through earth and chalk, approximately 2 meters high, 1.5 meters wide, reinforced with timber beams every few meters. The floor was packed dirt, worn smooth by use. The air was cool, damp, smelling of earth and something else, oil or grease. Thomas turned slowly, trying to understand what he was seeing. The tunnel extended in both directions, disappearing into darkness. This was not British construction. The style was wrong. The materials were wrong. This was German. Thomas climbed back up, his mind racing. He needed to report this. But report what? A tunnel? Where did it go? What was it for? If he reported a hole in the ground, he would sound like a fool. He needed more information. He grabbed a torch from his equipment, checked that it worked, and descended again into the shaft. At the bottom, he chose a direction north and began walking. The tunnel was silent, except for the sound of his boots on packed earth. Every 10 meters, timber supports. Every 20 meters, a small alcove carved into the wall, some empty, some containing crates. Thomas stopped at the first crate, pried it open. Inside, rifle ammunition, German 7.92 millimeters rounds, packed in stripper clips. He moved to the next alcove. More ammunition, then grenades. Then medical supplies, bandages, and morphine syringes stamped with Wehrmacht markings. He continued walking. 50 meters. 100. The tunnel did not end. It curved slightly, following the terrain above. At 120 meters, Thomas reached a junction. The tunnel split, one branch continuing north, another heading east. He took the northern branch. Another 50 meters, and he found something that made his breath catch. A chamber, larger than the tunnel, perhaps 5 meters square, with a ceiling high enough to stand fully upright. The chamber was filled with supplies. Fuel cans, dozens of them, stacked against the walls. Ammunition crates, piled chest high. Food containers, medical equipment. Boxes of grenades, mortar rounds, even a disassembled MG-42 machine gun. This was not a hiding place. This was a depot, an underground supply depot, hidden beneath the battlefield, accessible without exposing supply columns to Allied air superiority. Thomas turned and ran back the way he had come, his torch beam bouncing wildly off the tunnel walls. He climbed the shaft, emerged into daylight, and sprinted toward the camp. He found Sergeant Hackett inspecting a truck engine. "Sir," Thomas said, breathless, "you need to see something." Hackett looked at him with annoyance. "Ellery, if you are wasting my time," Hackett began. "Sir," Thomas interrupted, "there is a tunnel, a German supply tunnel, under the barn. It is full of ammunition and fuel." Hackett's expression shifted from annoyance to skepticism to something harder. "Show me." Thomas led Hackett to collapsed barn, showed him the wooden cover, the shaft, the tunnel below. Hackett descended, was gone for 10 minutes, and climbed back up with a grim expression. He told Thomas to stay at the site, guard it, let no one near. Then Hackett left at a run. Within 30 minutes, the area was swarming with officers. A captain from intelligence, a major from engineering, a lieutenant colonel from division headquarters. They descended into the tunnel, emerged, conferred, and descended again. Thomas stood to the side, forgotten, watching as his accidental discovery turned into something significant. The intelligence captain, a man named Lawson, questioned Thomas. "How did you find it? What did you see? Did you disturb anything?" Thomas answered honestly. He had been cleaning tools. The ground felt wrong. He investigated. He found the tunnel, explored it partially, reported it immediately. Lawson nodded, made notes, and told Thomas he had done well. Then Lawson organized a reconnaissance team, engineers and intelligence personnel, and they began mapping the tunnel system. Over the next 6 hours, they discovered the scale of what Thomas had found. The tunnel was not a single shaft. It was a network, over 2 kilometers of interconnected passages running beneath the battlefield, linking German rear positions to forward supply points without exposing convoys to air attack. The system had multiple access points, hidden under barns, destroyed buildings, even beneath hedgerows. The Germans had been using it to move ammunition, fuel, and reinforcement at night, invisible to Allied observation. The depot Thomas had found was one of 7 supply chambers distributed throughout the network. Combined, they held enough material to sustain a German infantry regiment for weeks. The implications were staggering. Allied intelligence had been tracking German supply movements, noting convoys, targeting logistics routes. But the convoys had been decoys, small and expendable, while the real supplies moved underground. The Germans had been resupplying their forward positions without detection, which explained why their resistance had been so stubborn, why positions that should have collapsed from lack of ammunition continue fighting. The tunnel network was a logistical masterpiece, built over months, probably starting in late 1943 when the Germans anticipated an Allied invasion. It represented hundreds of hours of labor, engineering expertise, and a deep understanding of Allied surveillance capabilities. Division headquarters ordered immediate action. Engineers rigged demolition charges at key junctions. Infantry secured the access points. Intelligence teams documented everything, photographed the supplies, cataloged the German equipment. By nightfall, the decision was made. The tunnel would be destroyed, denying the Germans the network and the supplies within it. Demolition was scheduled for dawn the following morning, June 25th. But before the charges were set, a new order came down. First, clear the supplies. recover anything usable. The Allies were fighting on a logistical razor's edge. Every round of ammunition mattered. If the Germans had stockpiled supplies, those supplies would now serve Allied forces. Thomas was assigned to a recovery team, a group of logistics personnel tasked with hauling crates and containers out of the tunnel before demolition. It was brutal work. The passages were narrow, the crates heavy, the air stifling. They worked through the night, carrying German ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, rations, everything salvageable. Thomas made over 40 trips into the tunnel, descending the shaft, navigating the dark passages, hauling loads back to the surface. His shoulders screamed. His legs trembled. But he worked without complaint. This was no longer punishment duty. This was essential. This mattered. By 5 a.m. on June 25th, the recovery operation was complete. Engineers placed demolition charges at 7 key points along the tunnel network. The charges were timed to detonate simultaneously, collapsing the entire system. At 5:47 a.m., the charges blew. The ground shook, a low rumble, then a series of muffled explosions, and the tunnel network ceased to exist, buried under tons of earth and rubble. German forces in the area, already under pressure from Allied advances, lost their hidden supply line. Within 48 hours, several forward positions collapsed, not from direct assault, but from lack of ammunition and reinforcement. The Germans had relied on the tunnel. Without it, their defense fractured. Thomas Ellery returned to his tool cleaning assignment. Sergeant Hackett said nothing about the tunnel, about the discovery, about the night of recovery work. The army moved on. The battle continued. But something had changed in Thomas. He had spent 2 years feeling distant from the war, feeling like his service was peripheral. And then, by accident, by punishment, by kneeling in the wrong place at the right time, he had uncovered something that mattered. He had not fired a shot. He had not charged a position. But he had denied the enemy resources. He had contributed to the collapse of their line. And he had done it with a shovel and a wire brush. The intelligence report on the tunnel network was filed and distributed through Allied command. It became a case study in German defensive innovation. Other tunnel networks were suspected, searched for, and occasionally found, though none as extensive as the one near Kristadt. The Germans had understood that Allied air superiority made surface supply routes suicidal. So they went underground, literally, creating logistics infrastructure invisible to reconnaissance aircraft. It was a solution born of desperation, but it had been effective until Thomas Ellery's knees pressed against a hollow spot in the ground. Thomas was not decorated. He was not promoted. His name appeared in the intelligence report as a discovering party. But no ceremony followed, no commendation, no recognition beyond a brief mention in the company log. He returned to logistics work, driving trucks, moving supplies, performing the unglamorous labor that kept armies functioning. He survived Normandy. He survived the advance through France. He was in Germany when the war ended in May 1945, unloading supply crates in a bombed-out rail yard, far from any parade or celebration. After the war, Thomas returned to England, to a small town in Yorkshire where his parents still lived in the same house they had occupied before the war, before his brother died, before everything changed. He worked in a factory, married a woman named Margaret, had 3 children, and lived a quiet life. He did not speak much about the war. When people asked, he said he had been in logistics, that he had driven trucks and moved supplies. He did not mention the tunnel. It seemed, in retrospect, too strange, too accidental to explain. How do you describe stumbling into something significant while scrubbing rust off a shovel? In 1963, a military historian, researching Normandy logistics, contacted Thomas. The historian had found the intelligence report on the tunnel network and was trying to piece together how it had been discovered. Thomas agreed to an interview. He described the morning, the collapsed barn, the hollow sound beneath his knees, the descent into the shaft. The historian asked why he had investigated instead of reporting immediately. Thomas thought for a moment. "I suppose I was curious," he said, "and I suppose I wanted to be certain before I looked foolish." The historian noted that Thomas's decision to explore the tunnel before reporting had provided critical information that shaped the Allied response. If he had simply reported a hole and waited, The Germans might have detected the discovery and collapsed the tunnel themselves, destroying the supplies and leaving no evidence of the network scale. Thomas had not thought of it that way. He had acted on instinct, on a need to understand before speaking, and that instinct had mattered. The historian asked if Thomas felt proud of the discovery. Thomas paused. "Proud is not the word," he said. "I felt relieved. Relieved that my service had meant something, that I had contributed, even if it was by accident. War is not what you expect. You imagine heroism, decisive moments, clarity. But most of it is confusion, exhaustion, and trying not to die while doing a job someone assigned you. The tunnel was the one moment where I felt like I was part of something larger, even though I did nothing except kneel in the wrong spot." The historian published a paper in 1965 documenting German underground logistics networks in Normandy. Thomas's discovery was featured prominently, described as a turning point in Allied understanding of German supply methods. The paper was read by military scholars, by veterans, by students of the campaign. Thomas received a copy in the mail. He read it once, carefully, and then placed it in a drawer where it stayed for the rest of his life. He did not need reminding. He remembered the tunnel. He remembered the smell of earth and oil, the weight of the crates, the hollow echo of his boots on packed dirt. He remembered the feeling of descending into darkness, not knowing what he would find, driven by curiosity and a vague sense that something was not right. Thomas Ellery died in 1987, age 62, from complications related to lung disease, likely exacerbated by years of breathing dust and exhaust fumes during the war. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his service in Normandy, his years at the factory, his family. It did not mention the tunnel. His children knew fragments of the story, but not the details, not the significance. After his death, his daughter found the historian's paper in his belongings, read it, and realized her father had been part of something she had never fully understood. She contacted the Imperial War Museum, donated his wartime letters and documents, and requested that his story be included in their logistics collection. It was, though quietly, without fanfare, preserved among thousands of other accounts of ordinary men doing extraordinary things by accident or design. The lessons from Thomas's discovery extended beyond Normandy. Military planners studied the German tunnel networks as examples of adaptive logistics under constraints. When air superiority is absolute, when surface movement is suicide, what alternatives exist? The Germans had answered by going underground. Modern militaries, facing similar challenges, have explored comparable solutions, hardened supply routes, subterranean logistics hubs, infrastructure designed to survive air dominance. The principle remains: logistics is not about strength. It is about sustainability, about keeping forces supplied when the enemy controls the environment. Thomas had uncovered a physical manifestation of that principle, a network built from desperation and ingenuity, and in uncovering it, he had demonstrated another principle: vigilance and curiosity matter, sometimes more than training or equipment. The collapsed barn near Christstadt, where Thomas found a tunnel entrance, was never rebuilt. The land reverted to agriculture after the war, plowed and planted, the scars of combat erased by time and farming. No marker indicates what lay beneath. No sign explains that a 19-year-old British soldier, punished for stealing cigarettes, knelt there one morning and discovered a secret that changed the course of local operations. History does not preserve every site, every moment. Most are forgotten, plowed under, built over, loss of memory. But the event itself, the fact of discovery, that remains, recorded in reports and papers and the memories of those who were there. Thomas's story is not unique in its outline. Wars are full of accidental discoveries, of soldiers stumbling into intelligence, of luck masquerading as skill. But Thomas's story is unique in its simplicity and its clarity. He was not a scout, not an intelligence officer, not someone trained to recognize anomalies. He was a logistics private, cleaning tools, who noticed that the ground sounded wrong. That observation, that moment of curiosity, mattered more than 100 planned reconnaissance missions, because the Germans had hidden their logistics so well that planned searches had missed it entirely. It took accident, punishment, and a boy with nothing to do but scrub rust to expose what deliberate effort had failed to find. There is a broader truth here, one that Thomas understood instinctively even if he never articulated it. War is not controlled. It is not a chess game where pieces move according to plan. It is chaos, temporarily structured by discipline and doctrine, but always threatening to dissolve into accident and improvisation. In that chaos, the unexpected matters, the soldier cleaning tools, the ground that sounds hollow, the decision to investigate instead of ignore. These small moments, unremarkable in isolation, can cascade into significance. Thomas did not set out to discover a tunnel. He set out to clean a shovel, but he paid attention. He noticed, and he acted. That combination, attention, curiosity, action, is rarer than courage. Courage is common in war. Almost everyone finds it when necessary. But attention, the ability to see what is wrong when everything is already chaos, that is the skill that changes outcomes. The German engineers who built the tunnel network near Kristadt were never identified. They were likely combat engineers, experienced in fortification and construction, working under the direction of logistics officers who understood that the Normandy defense would require innovation. They had built something impressive, functional, and nearly invisible. They had solved a critical problem, but they had made one mistake. They had assumed that their concealment was perfect, that no one would notice, that the Allies would never look beneath the obvious. And that assumption failed because a 19-year-old boy cleaning tools knelt in the wrong place and heard an echo that should not exist. Thomas did not see himself as clever or perceptive. In interviews late in life, he described himself as lucky, nothing more. But luck is not random. Luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. And Thomas had been prepared not by training, but by mindset. He had spent his childhood solving problems, fixing things, taking apart machinery to understand how it worked. His father had been a mechanic, and Thomas had learned to see systems, to notice when something did not fit, when a sound was wrong, when a piece was missing. That mindset, applied to a patch of ground behind a collapsed barn, turned punishment duty into strategic intelligence. It was not magic. It was not genius. It was simply paying attention in a context where most people had stopped noticing anything except survival. The recovery of German supplies from the tunnel before its demolition provided Allied forces with a temporary logistics boost. Small but meaningful. Ammunition is ammunition, regardless of origin. Fuel is fuel. Medical supplies saved lives no matter whose flag they were packed under. The captured material was redistributed, used, and exhausted within weeks. But those weeks mattered. They sustained operations. They kept soldiers fighting when supply lines were stretched thin. And they existed only because Thomas Ellery had noticed a hollow sound and decided to investigate instead of ignore. In the final analysis, the tunnel network near Kristadt was a footnote in the Normandy campaign, significant locally but not strategically. The war was decided by larger forces, by overwhelming Allied superiority in men and material, by German exhaustion and strategic error. The tunnel did not change the outcome, but it changed the pace, the cost, the small battles that accumulated into the larger victory. And it changed Thomas Ellery, who learned that his service, however ordinary it seemed, could matter in ways he would never predict. That lesson sustained him through the remainder of the war and into the decades that followed, a quiet knowledge that he had been part of something larger, even if only by accident, even if only for a moment. The story of Thomas Ellery and the hidden supply tunnel is not a story of heroism in the traditional sense. It is a story of attention, of noticing, of the small actions that ripple into significance. It is a reminder that war is not only decided by generals and grand strategies, but also by privates cleaning tools who stop, listen, and investigate when the ground sounds wrong. It is a testament to the reality that the most important discoveries are often made by people not looking for them, by individuals doing unglamorous work in unremarkable places who happen to notice what everyone else has missed. And it is a tribute to the idea that service, even when it feels meaningless, even when it is punishment, can still matter if you pay attention, if you care enough to investigate, if you refuse to accept that the surface is all there is. Thomas Ellery was assigned to clean tools. He ended up discovering a network that sustained German resistance and, in exposing it, contributed to its collapse. He did not plan it. He did not seek it. But when the moment came, when the ground shifted beneath his knees, he did not ignore it. He investigated. And in that investigation, In that refusal to dismiss the anomaly, he became part of the history he had wanted to join, not as a combat soldier, not as a decorated hero, but as a logistics private who paid attention when it mattered most. That is legacy enough. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more untold accounts from history. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below.